Good evening. This is a stand-in talk because, first of all, last night I was tied up late with Ari Melber on breaking news out of Georgia, which was fascinating to me, but I didn't have any time left when I got home last night. And today, Holly and I are spending a lot of time at Johns Hopkins for tests and so forth. Nothing terrible, but this is what she has to do. And we have to learn together, and I'm the caretaker so that we uh, avoid infection and rejection. That's the whole game. That's the game for the rest of her life. But she's doing well now, and so we keep working on that. So, what's going on in America? Let's talk about woke. I was very frustrated in the recent elections when people didn't know how to handle these charges of wokeness. And I came across an old Ledbetter song in 1938. And it was about the Scottsboro Boys. And the Scottsboro Boys were 9 boys who were on trains going around during the Depression, hopping off and trying to find work. But they came off the train, and there were the boys that were white and the Scottsboro boys that were black. And there were 2 women who got off the trains, and they were white, and it was assumed that something had gone on there. And they pressed the girls, and one said that she'd been raped, and that was enough to turn their lives into hell. As it turned out, it was all a lie. The women were prostitutes, and crossing the state line because of the Mann Act could expose them, so they lied about it and they later recanted, but not until there was a lot of grief among the Scottsboro boys. And there were songs about it and about the prejudice of it and the bias and so forth. And in the song that Ledbetter wrote in 1938 about the Scottsboro boys, at 4 minutes and 29 seconds into the song, he says, "Stay woke. Stay woke to injustices and discrimination." So in 1938, that was a concern. Now, what do we have today? We have people who've turned this on its head, and Democrats won't address it. And you've heard me say that you can't win the argument that you don't make, and that's what we do. We don't make the argument. We don't make the argument because we have our own discrimination in the Democratic Party, and among others. And those who were active in the Tea Party, that was, to my way of thinking, just a guise to conceal their bias against Obama and having an African-American president. Just drove them nuts. So what really is the anti-woke movement about? What it's about is it's about bias. It's against difference. It's against transgender. It's against race. It's against sex. It's against intellect, education, thinking. It's about freedom. And it's about democracy. All of these things they're against. And what are they for? They favor violence. They favor autocracy. They favor lies. They favor winning at any cost. And they seek to control the government by whim. They want an autocracy, not by history or law or by our Constitution, which they will praise, but they praise what they haven't read. And we see it. There's the new kind of Christianity, too. It's the faux Christian. It's the political Christian who uses the guise of the church to do all of these things, to be uncharitable where charity is supposed to be. Instead of children of God, sort of the demons of a base life that cares brutally to be in charge at any cost because they just want that to happen. So when I hear woke and I see our Democratic Party sort of brushing it off and saying it doesn't matter and the people won't be taken in by it, I get worried because that's the same kind of language that Americans used when Trump first came down that escalator. Oh, that's not going to mean anything. And it did. It meant a lot, and it meant a lot of terrible things. And his plan was to win the Electoral College, not the popular vote. He never wanted that. And he thought by a stratagem of arranging the electoral vote in his favor, he could become president. And he did. That and dirty tricks and Comey and all sorts of things that was the template for who they are today. So that's one of my big beefs right now. We had a show of strength yesterday by our president, Biden, in sort of a matchup with Putin. And we pledged support for NATO, and we pledged support for the Ukraine. And the real test will be if we give planes to the Ukraine. Now, the Ukraine probably can't win without planes, and we cannot avoid being a party to the war if our planes are up in the air in dogfights and managing the ground game from thousands and thousands of feet in the air. And the question is America ready for it? And I'm not so sure, even though I'm of a generation that sat at the knee of my dad and mom who went through World War II, and relatives and friends and people who came back with all manner of injuries, mental and physical. And then as a young man, I saw the Vietnam War and how we were lied into that war. Apologies to my friends who appeared and showed courage and did their duty to our government, which was all the time misleading them. So what are we going to do? I get very concerned when I feel a testosterone match between Putin and Biden. And both, I think, sees that they're going to be writing their legacy and the outcome of what happens in Ukraine. And I think we should be, practicing more non-attachment to traditional ways to approach a war. And if we're going to wage the war, wage it, and talk less and do more. But that's our problem. The derailment issue, the train that overturned Norfolk Southern, apparently the government is bearing down on them. We'll have to watch it and wait and see what happens. The EPA is involved. They're going to be asking the company to cover all the expenses. It's going to be a mess. There's going to be lots of suffering. There may be some reforms. They may be followed, or they may be ignored as they have been thus far. And then finally, the other reason I'd like to talk is about the mess in Georgia. If the prosecutor had never gone to a grand jury they couldn't indict, we wouldn't be where we are today. And I'm a little concerned, not what the grand jury foreman has said so far, as much as the suggestion of all the different things this grand jury heard that a regular grand jury would not hear. In other words, we wouldn't be surprising witnesses in a grand jury about getting immunity if they would testify when they had apparently refused to testify. These kinds of things, when you have a charging decision, that is, you go to issue an indictment, those kinds of things are not before the grand jury. They shouldn't be before the grand jury. In fact, usually what an experienced prosecutor does is call a new grand jury and only admit to them information and evidence that is appropriate under due process standards, that is sensitive to the fact that the prosecutor is the only person that talks about the crime or offense at hand. So what we have is we have a woman who was the foreperson who was given at least one long interview and several others to print journalists. And I'm frankly surprised that the judge hasn't called her on the carpet and said, "What the hell are you doing? And you shouldn't be doing that." So where are we in America? We're in the foothills of another presidential campaign. The person who tried to overthrow the government and steal the last election is running for office, and he hasn't been indicted or charged, although there's a lot of talk and hope. And in my opinion, the apologists for the Justice Department keep talking like what they're discovering is going to lead to something when it hasn't yet, more than 2 years after the events that are relevant to prosecuting Trump. And that sends a signal to the entire nation. We are entirely flat-footed as well when McCarthy, the Speaker of the House, on behalf of the Republicans, hands over all of the video files to a journalist on Fox. Now, I've heard some of the Democrats' objections. I thought from the beginning all this stuff should be released. And if you were getting something that shouldn't be released, then it shouldn't be part of the record. You need rules for a whole variety of reasons. And we need a discipline of the standards that should apply no matter who the defendant is. And I think they'll serve us well. But my dad always said a poor workman blames his tools. We have good tools. We have laws, we have constitution, we have a long history of how to do this. And the distortion, if you will, in the ethos of justice and equality is the powerful who are going to be brought down if prosecutors and government officials do their duty and work to preserve and protect our Constitution and our nation, to preserve our democracy, and to respect the people who've taken the chances they have. So I sympathize with the grand juror, the foreperson of the grand jury in the Georgia investigation that involves the tapes of Trump literally committing crimes. And I understand her because, well, first of all, she probably hasn't had any experience like this one. She's thrust into this. But there is an element in all of us that doesn't require to have law books or anything else to know something is just wrong. And I think she knows that and senses that. And I think she has the frustration in the short term that she's been involved in this investigation to desire it to be affected, to desire the recommendations, even if spoon-fed by the prosecutor, that those are the recommendations they voted on one after another before that report was issued to the judge. So America continues to be in a difficult position, and we don't make the hard choices with intellect, with passion, with a belief in our standards, historical, of justice, and of the Constitution, and of the laws of the land. And until we find our way home to these values and make them the ground of our being, as we the people and our elected representatives, we're in for rough times. So I apologize that I haven't been out in daylight hours to talk to you on the trail. And I understand it's going to be a scorcher tomorrow. And Holly and I have to split our time between Johns Hopkins for tests and debriefings and so forth. We're approaching a year since Holly had her operation. And we're also, our anniversary is impending on March the 1st. And the operation was March the 26th. So we're getting very close. And knock on wood, my head, we haven't had infections or rejections. And in our own family unit, it's because we've tried to be as disciplined as possible. But people can do everything in this and be caught up short. So we're doing what we can. And our microcosm of how to handle our little family is how we have to handle the family of man and woman in America. And we have to do some of the hard things, and we have to use discipline, and we have to fight, and we have to push our elected representatives to speak the truth to illegal powers. And unless and until we do that, we will not restore this nation. So thanks for joining me. Sorry to be in my home office, but I look forward to being out on the trail tomorrow. Bye-bye.